Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of Blame It on Marketing, where we discuss all the cliche stuff that people have said to us in marketing over the years. And today's episode we are going to be discussing virtue signalling and how sometimes, marketing ends up looking like the virtue signalling department. And we are joined today by the awesome Timi, and I will let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Emma. So I'm Timi Olotu. I'm Director of Revenue at CharlieHR. I also have a small software project called òtító, and my background is I started my career as a journalist, then an advertising copywriter. Then I slowly moved into the world of sales and marketing, and now I'm a full-on money man. A money man with good standards and ethics, I would say.
I'll back that. Timmy's only one of my favourite people, so we know that the ethics are high when it comes to that.
Yes, and looks like we'll have a good opportunity to discuss some of those today.
Emma,
Absolutely.
Before we started recording this, was telling us how hyped up she is about this because she's got some real strong opinions on virtue signalling. So why don't I let you kick off the podcast with that?
I think, if I'm being honest, where that all comes from is that I used to work in the third sector, and in particular I worked for some international development organisations, working with governments around the world on actual real public health issues and things like that. So strong opinions come from good places. I think that's what I'm going to say anyway. And the reason we're talking about virtue signalling is because it's something that you kind of see everywhere, right? So, whether it's the Ukraine war or it's, Pride or Black Lives Matter, what tends to happen is we see corporations jump on the back of those sort of like really big, sometimes international crises, I can't say that, and then try to piggyback off it in a way that sort of tries to make their brand appear like they care about those things. And I'm obviously very skeptical, which is why I said appear like that. So Timi, I want to come to you and just hear a little bit about what are your thoughts on this. Where do you think it kind of stems from?
Yeah, good question. The first thing I would say is I have strong opinions loosely held. And I say loosely held because I try and have a healthy respect for the limitations of my own perspective, which is one of the fundamental issues that I think causes brands to get this wrong. I think the immediate knee-jerk reaction to the position that I've just explained is like, well, then you don't stand for anything. It's like, no, that's not what it means. The fact that I'm not going to behave as if there is nothing that can be true outside the sphere of my own perspective does not mean in any given moment in time I'm not clear about what I think and what I feel. And I think what that does, it allows us to be realistic. So I actually coincidentally saw a great example of this on Instagram yesterday. It's this video of David Guetta, the DJ. And I don't know if you've seen it. It's him doing this DJ set in like some weird sex dungeon. And he's like, this is for George Floyd. Shout out to his family. And I'm like, what? And obviously all the comments are just like, what are you doing? And that is the kind of concentrated equivalent of what brands do a lot of the time. And I think the main issues that I see are this. One, brands don't properly understand the complexities of these issues, partly because I would say a brand cannot. Because a brand, even though we talk about it in linguistic terms as a single entity, it's actually obviously a moniker for a collective. And in order to understand something deeply, like you were saying, Emma, like, when you have those strong feelings because you care a lot, you need a certain level of like deep personal investment. And when you have a company, like there's no one often who is A, invested enough because of a personal experience, B, has enough total control of the brand to like just fully engage with the issue, not just on a personal but an organizational level. And two, I think I'm tempted to say this in a nice way, but that's dishonest. the second issue is the brands don't actually really care. Even the people in the brands who are running these campaigns, and it becomes exposed very quickly. And an example of that is like this World Cup, the rainbow armband. I think it's shambolic that we do all these years of like, stand up to discrimination and da. And then the moment it's like, we'll give you a red card or a yellow card if you do it. Oh, sorry, gays. I know you're having a tough time, but I don't want a yellow card. It's like how much, like, you don't really believe in it if you're not willing to like take a hit in service. And that's the point. Like, at the end of the day, companies are not willing to take it. If it's like either your growth gets damaged or you stand for this issue, companies are going to be like, ugh, got to go with growth. I'm not judging that. I'm just saying don't pretend. Which brings me to the third thing, which is a lot of marketers these days want to pretend that the only way you can do marketing is if you virtue signal. They don't call it virtue signaling, they call it purpose-led marketing, whatever. It's like you're not doing marketing unless you pick an issue. And that's just like empirically, statistically not true. So like you don't need to pick an issue in order to do marketing well. And again, the straw man to that is to say, well, we need businesses to do good. Businesses can do good. You can donate. You can like run events. You can do all sorts of things. You just don't need to like integrate it into your marketing and use it as a basis for like getting attention. So that was a bit of a lecture, but that's like a summary of my view on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you, Timi. And I think one of the things that stands out to me is that organizations, and they've been caught out for it, right? I think we've mentioned Brewdog on another episode of this, so am I going to get sued? I don't know. I'm going to do it anyway. They are someone who themselves have been caught out by this, right? Like, if I'm going to pick a popular brand who've been dragged through the mud for saying that they support their LGBTQ colleagues, that they supported Black Lives Matter, that they're the anti-sponsor of, Qatar, all of that kind of stuff, but they themselves do not treat their employees in a way that is worthy. So like they are basically using global issues and issues that are kind of really at the heart of someone's existence, right? If you stand up for gay rights, that's your life. They are using that as a marketing machine, which to me is just fundamentally wrong. And I in many cases, like Timi, I agree. I fail to see how that is going to generate you revenue, because at the end of the day, you will get called out for your bullshit because people know. We live in a world where we've got things like Glassdoor, even people just talking and networking and saying, actually, don't go work there, or like, don't buy from them because they're shitbags. They do awful stuff to their employees. That stuff matters now. Maybe 20 years ago, or maybe when, like, I'm going to be really rude, our boomer parents were buying stuff, it was less of an issue. But when, you've got a millennial generation in particular who are your buyers, like, we want to know that you actually do what you say you do.
I just wanted to pick up on the football example. So the reason why I find it extra fascinating, and I'm not a huge football nerd by any means, so if I get this wrong, please tell me, is because there has been such a historic problem with gays in football, and this was something that they should have been fighting for as an organization, as FIFA, as whoever runs the World Cup. This is an actual problem within their teams and within the culture of what they do, and to just let basically a country's politics dictate how you do that seems really silly, because surely you could have just had, I assume there's lots of money involved and lots of people in others' pockets, when it comes to football stuff. We all know that's true, but at the end of the day, all the players could have decided that, okay, you give me a yellow card, but I'm not counting it. I'm not going to come off the pitch if you give me a red card after that, because I don't acknowledge this as a thing that you can do to me because I wore something coloured on my sleeve. Like, that's as stupid as that is. So for an organisation to be actually so impacted and have had so many stories about this, and who has tried to campaign so hard to make it better for their own players, to then also be okay with giving people yellow cards because they wore a piece of coloured rainbow on them in a country that doesn't acknowledge people of coloured rainbows. It's really strange, like, how everyone just backed out of it. I would have thought they would have wanted to fight extra hard if that came down to it, but it was just like, yep, nope.
I would agree. It's a kind of gaslighting, you know. It's like, and I say gaslighting because it's like you're really doing this just because you think you can make money, but you're trying to convince the people who actually care about this that you're just like them. And it's so obvious that you're not. Like, LGBTQ people don't get to tap in and out of their struggles. Like, oh, well, today I'm going to care. What I find really fascinating and somewhat abhorrent is that, you know, you have people, professionals in the world of football now saying, well, you know, we're just here to play football. Let's not mix all these things with football. It's like, you mixed it before when there were no stakes. You were very comfortable to do that. So my issue, I'm like a real, maybe some people would say to an annoying degree, stickler for clarity. And I think either position is fine, actually, because I don't think, as I said earlier, that the only way to support a particular cause or movement or issue is to do it through the mechanics of public activities and public image. There are other ways to be supportive. And it's perfectly reasonable to say, you know what, we don't think we can do a good job of doing this through our brand or marketing, whatever. So, but we do want to support LGBTQ people, so we will pay for services that support them, their mental health. We will pay for, you know, impoverished people. We'll do whatever. You know, we'll create mentorship programs. We'll whatever. We'll make it easier for gay footballers to come out in the Premier League, whatever, something. But to skip all that and just try, and it's like a cheap trick. And I really hate that we just don't call it that. Like, I'm yet to encounter a convincing argument that something else is happening, that this is actually because people care, sort of thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Timi. I've heard it said from some people where some organisations do this stuff when it's a big, like, B2B corporate or even B2C corporate, actually, you know, going out there and saying, like, we support our gay colleagues, and it's kind of as much as we're going to change our logo to the pride flag. And some people say, well, I'll take that over nothing because at least they're showing that they do care, even like publicly, kind of acknowledging events that have occurred, all of that kind of stuff. So I have heard like a counter argument to it, which is, you know, it's better than like nothing, because before we had nothing. But I would also say, I think, and we discussed this in another episode where we're talking about thought leadership, you've got to put in the work first. Your business needs to put in the work first, like you say to me. It's got to be behind the scenes. You've got to really show that you care. You've got to demonstrate that you are prepared to care outside of those kind of really public occasions. And then, and maybe only then, can you publicly say, you know, we actually have done something to support people. Because, you know, another example of this is, I always think, you know, we have International Women's Day, which is something that, like, we can talk about, and every year it comes around and you see organisations who kind of are like, yeah, I love all the women that work in this business, they're all amazing, you know, but then I would be like, what's your maternity pay like? Do you have a menopause policy? Do you offer flexible working for your mothers? And I would imagine 9 times out of 10 those policies don't hold up. So I think it's that. I think it's like, do the work, put the work in, and then maybe you can think about talking about it publicly. Any thoughts on, like, I guess maybe it's the counter argument almost to me, like, why would they have started to do these things? Like, you know.
Good question. So this is where my kind of summary at the beginning, where I was like, I appreciate there are things outside my sphere of experience, comes into play. I'm a somewhat hyper-logical person, so the way I see things and like to interact with things is they're very kind of clear-cut lines about them. But I understand that's not how most people think and behave, and there's no better field in which to learn and observe this than in marketing. So in my head, I want people to mean what they say and only say the things they mean, because that's when I will take it seriously. That's when it means something to me. But I understand that humans are like complex, messy, mostly irrational creatures. And this is the annoying thing, and this is part of why companies still do it, even with the inconsistencies, with the hypocrisy, with the kind of duplicity. There are a lot of people who just see the surface level of like, oh, they put a pride flag or BLM thing, and they go, oh, yeah, I feel good about that. And those people post on social media, and the executives of these brands see this, and they go, oh, wow, okay, it is making a difference. I should stress, and there's a marketing professor I really like called Byron Sharp, who's like, well, his institute has done some work on this. That does not necessarily mean that people will buy from you. And I think this is the leap of logic people make, that, oh, if they're responding to our virtue signaling, that means they'll buy from us. No, it doesn't. Those are two completely independent memory associations. But I think that's part of what's going on. People see that and they go, oh, well, we're doing something good. And I think that is actually valid in a sense, which may sound inconsistent with what I'm saying, but it's valid in the sense that if you are such a business and you are partaking in this, let's just say for the sake of argument, it is hypocritical virtue signaling, and your assumption is that people care, and you are seeing people ostensibly caring, then you've done what you wanted to do. So in that sense, that's fine. But I think for me, the reason why that's not enough for me is I think there's actually some actual harm that is done by it. I think there's an actual human cost, and there are consequences, but the consequences are more kind of diffused, and they're more out of the limelight, so people don't care about those consequences. I won't go into that particular rant now, but that's a summary of what I think of it.
I think it's absolutely okay for companies to also not say anything. Like, I think there's more risk to saying something than to not saying anything, unless you're like super duper obviously involved in something. You're a charity that works with LGBTQ people, and you don't say something when something happens. Obviously, that's not an option. But there's very little risk to not saying something, whilst there is some risk to going out of your way, jumping on some sort of bandwagon and then fucking it up, because there will be usually repercussions to that. So I just want to say, there is an option to just do nothing, and that's the evil option. But there is an option to do nothing, and that's okay.
I think I agree with that. And my view of it is doing nothing, kind of as we've covered throughout this discussion, is just basically not playing that game. It doesn't mean you can't treat people well. It doesn't mean you can't help people. It just means not playing that that virtue signaling game. I think I'll talk about the issues that I have personal experience with, because I don't want Twitter to cancel me. But obviously, I'm Black, I'm African, I'm an immigrant, I have Asperger's, so I'm like neurodivergent. And the issue that I see with this is, I've observed in many companies a kind of outward proclamation of a particular value or stance or whatever. And then when you're an employee in that company, if you take that at face value and you believe it and you start to act in accordance with it, it hurts your career. It makes people frustrated with you. They're like, why are you focused on your job? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Because fundamentally, it's not an organizationally entrenched position, because the company is too big and there are too many people with their own independent thoughts, and you go out with this kind of message. The one that's really annoying me at the moment is like, because neurodivergent is like a hot topic at the moment, and everyone's going, yeah, you got to make space for all your like neurodivergent employees. They have just as much value and blah, blah, blah. And my experience is that, frankly, it's bullshit. Because one, these people, like, to be fair, even neuroscientists and, psychologists are just starting to get a deeper understanding of these phenomena, which is fine, so shut up. Don't pretend you know more about it than you do. And then people who are neurodivergent come into these organizations, and it is as neurotypical as you can imagine. Everything is just geared towards the standard brain, standard method of operation, which I'm not saying is bad. I feel very strongly about that, actually, because the temptation in conversations like this is to denigrate the majority, which I don't think is helpful. It's like, of course, yeah, that's what most people are like. Cater to that. But don't set up this expectation that you're going to bend in all sorts of ways to accommodate people, and then they come in and think, oh, okay, I don't need to, I know people with ADHD and other forms of neurodivergence. They're like, okay, this thing that other companies haven't accepted about me, it's okay, they'll accept it here. And it's like, no, we won't. Why aren't you behaving like everybody else? And then they get fired. I've literally seen that. And it's like, there's a real cost there, and I'm sure there are LGBTQ corollaries. I'm sure you can give me loads of examples with women's issues, I'm sure, where it's like, hey, we support women, but actually you're not ready to take on the reality of allowing a woman to bring her issues to the workplace. And that for me is the cost. That's why I don't feel neutral about this, basically.
Speaking of International Women's Day and the last point you made, I believe this cropped up last year on Twitter, but there was a Twitter feed that was basically dedicated to calling out these companies who were posting about International Women's Day, and a lot of these companies were big corps, and then they would go and look at their basically pay equality report, and basically every single one, women were getting paid less than men for the same positions, and it was just calling them out, which is so hilarious and so at the most basic level, not what this is about. I totally agree with the neurodivergent thing. It's like the new hot thing, which is, so boring. Come on, guys. We've got better shit to be talking about, right? I'm all for understanding other people, knowing how to work with them best. I feel like I'm a mildly accommodating person. I'm not gonna give myself too much credit, but it's not a new trend or a hot thing to have. These, it's hard for most people. I have anxiety, it's hard for me, let alone if my brain was wired in a weird way and I didn't understand deadlines, or I didn't understand how someone was communicating with me. These are really hard things. They're not a new hot thing to have or a new thing to talk about. This shit is serious.
God, I was just going to say, it just goes back to that whole point that these are people's lives, and outside of this, we live with it. So whatever that it is that your organisation is trying to either virtue signal about, or is structurally making difficult for you because of the way they structure the organisation, you go home, you live with that at night. So it shouldn't be a fad or a trend, or this year we're going to care about this and next year we'll care about something else. It's if you actually want to fundamentally make people's working lives better, and then by nature of that say we've actually done that, then you've got to make your workplace inclusive for everyone, which is really, really hard to do. I mentioned before, I worked in the third sector. All the organisations I worked for were disability organisations. Some of them were kind of advocacy disability organisations, and advocating to literally the world's leaders about disability issues and access to work issues. And it is really, really hard. But the place to start is to either talk to the people in your organisation and try to understand, and then actually present to them solutions that you think might help them, rather than forcing upon them a viewpoint that you've got, or, oh, I read a really great Deloitte thing, so now I'm going to employ loads of neurodiverse people and I'm not going to support them properly. Great. You know, you've really got to take into consideration the needs of the people before you and do it properly. Don't do it half-assed.
Amen, Emma. I think that's like really, if I'm being constructive about this issue, that would be my advice. The CEO of my current company, Ben Branson Gately, I really like something he says, which is chop wood and carry water. Everyone wants to skip that and just live in a mansion. They just want to jump to the sexy thing. It's like, just calm down, look at the people in your own company, try and deal with them. Try and get that to a good place. I think very quickly, businesses would realize, people coming up with these initiatives would realize, we don't know what the fuck we're doing. So we're not in a position to be proselytizing in public about how to do this or how to do that. As you mentioned, Ruta, I think organizations whose kind of raison d'etre is fundamentally about a particular issue, they get a pass, because then they have tied themselves to the messiness of whatever issue it is. And then, like the people who deal with that issue, they don't get to tap in and out. And I think that does have consequences. So I think they get to talk about these issues because they've tied their ability to make money to that issue. And I think that's like really the yardstick is like, okay, if you're going to get involved with this issue, are you willing, how much money are you willing to lose? Not to donate, to lose, as in people actually stop working with you, criticize you, employees quit. What are you willing to lose to support it? And I think the answer for a lot of businesses would be nothing or very little. And I think in those situations, like just go back to basics, try and figure out what you're about, and don't. I think part of what you were kind of touching on, Ruta, is it's almost like fetishization of these issues as well, like this neurodivergence thing. It's like, yeah, people's brains are complex. Newsflash. it's not some new wave to ride. At best, it's a reminder to just keep thinking about that, but it's not something that's like a few gimmicks, a new piece of software is gonna like automatically solve. But then one criticism I can hear to my position is sort of like, it's too conservative. Like we need to charge into things no matter how messy it is. I've explained my reasons for not sharing that perspective, but I'll be interested to hear yours about whether you think this is what progress looks like no matter what. It's just people bumbling their way through and ending up somewhere good.
I think it depends on, it's hard because all the issues we've spoken about, they're serious issues that affect lots of people. So we're not talking about, I don't know, how great the color blue is and let's jump on the blue bandwagon, you know, that's a different problem. I do think in part it's how progress happens, but it's definitely not the most efficient way to get progress, in my opinion. So I think the efficient way to get progress is actually to change internally as a company and actually affect the people that are within your company, and then that will basically carry forward. So everyone then goes to a new company, will have those expectations, and it should quite quickly escalate to that being the norm. So actually giving somebody a great experience, whether they're black, white, gay, straight, neurodivergent, completely normie, whatever it is, making sure that they have a great experience and they know that, you know, these are the things and this is how you support them. That's really, to me, the like viral and efficient and effective way to do it, because then their standards will be higher and they'll be expecting that from the rest of society, and society is going to have to catch up. So that's my thoughts. Again, is that viable for everyone to do? No. Are there plenty of homophobic people still out there and racist? Yes. Will they ever do this? No. So, I don't know. It doesn't seem efficient to me, to say the least, but maybe it is, and maybe thousands of people are okay with people being gay now because of all of the gay pride flags that companies have adorned themselves with, but I don't have the data on that.
I agree with you, Ruta. I think it's got to come from, I think the other thing is that we know from, even when you look at, like, if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer from last year, it categorically says people in general trust like CEOs and founders of big businesses above like world leaders. And, you know, and it's understandable. We just came out of a horrific pandemic. So people are looking to big business to impact and change the world. And I think as people are building companies and growing companies, you do have an opportunity and also a responsibility, whether that's from a sustainability perspective or that's from a kind of, like tackling racism or homophobia or whatever that is within your organisation. You have an opportunity to do that, but you've got to do it properly. And then I think from there, like you say, Ruta, I think the rest of society starts to change. If you've had a good experience within a company where you have felt heard, listened to, and therefore your experience has changed as a result, I think you carry that with you throughout the rest of your career. Like, you obviously, that you also remember all the terrible organisations you worked for that treated you like shit, but one good organisation that has the ability to change the sort of maybe even the course of your life potentially. And I think we all can then take that with us. But I also think those leaders, because people do trust them so much implicitly, like I mean, personally, I look at some stuff and I'm like, why would you trust Elon Musk over like a scientist? I don't know, but some people, they just do. When you look at that, again, those people have a responsibility to talk about the stuff that they are actual expert. Like we talked about this in the Thought Leader episode, didn't we, Ruta? They should talk about the stuff that they're actually expert in and leave the other stuff that they're not experts in to the experts.
Insightful takes. I had all sorts of light bulbs going on, one of which is, I think this is one of the reasons we get on well, Ruta, is I think we both like efficiency. And I agree with your point about it not being the most efficient way. And there's this thinker called René Girard, and he has this theory, which is kind of mimetic theory. And the idea is that a lot of society and culture develops as a consequence of mimesis. Like, people look at other people and copy them. And you can see how icons are created here. So you have an icon, and then people, for whatever reason, this person is particularly good at hunting game or whatever, and people mimic the attributes of that, and as an aggregate you develop a societal cultural norm. And I think that plays a big part here, because essentially I think one of the best ways, if you want to effect change, is to become the best case study of the thing that you're trying to effect change about. Like, there's so many examples of this. Like, all the startups started copying Facebook and Google. Why? Because they became big and super, and everyone wanted to work with them. All of a sudden it's like, yeah, we also got to have like ping pong tables and this and that, even where it wasn't helpful. But that's what happened. If we look at pop culture, you know, there are examples of Kim Kardashian. She literally said, I don't know if you've seen the video, she literally said, I'm going to change like the perception of beauty in women. I'm going to make big butts attractive. And she did. And David Bowie, he like established this like androgynous look. He wasn't the first androgynous looking person, but he made it work so well that loads of other dudes were like, it is okay if I look in between a man and a woman. And I think a lot of examples, I don't have the data, so I'm not going to be definitive about it, but just based on my assessment and perception of how society and culture evolves, a lot of examples of when things actually change is because someone just models the thing that they're trying to get everyone else to copy in a really good and attractive way. So I would say for a lot of these companies, it's like mostly wasted effort. Like, if you want people to like respect LGBTQ colleagues, create a workplace that like really treats them with respect. If you want people to like, you know, treat women better, create a workplace that's like the gold standard for it. And I'm not saying it's not even like, it's not a final point where you hit it and it's done. It's just like commit to that process of constantly trying to figure it out. And if you can show that it works in a way that is like advantageous, people will copy you, basically, much more than I would say if you're BrewDog and you're going out there and you're doing loads of stunts, but people are kind of going, I don't know, you're kind of not doing that. So I think it probably works to some degree, but I would argue it's like highly inefficient.
This is quite interesting and quite prevalent in marketing is greenwashing. Biases here. I'm a big old climate change believer, so if you're not into that, you can stop listening and just don't come back. That's fine. And also I'm very anti-liberal in my stance on how to fix this. So I believe that companies are responsible for the majority of fixing climate change, because as a consumer, you are typically very limited to what you can consume, because what you can consume is produced by a company. Of course, you can make choices, but then we get into things like elitism and how much money you have, and that fact that green products are much more expensive. So if you want an overall societal change, companies need to be basically held very strictly accountable to everything that they do in terms of the impact on the environment. I guess that is a liberal approach because it means that the government has to control it, but whatevs. So what a lot of companies are doing now, and I find it quite deceitful, is that they're making things look green. They're making things look like they care about them. But when you actually dig into the numbers, and if you understand things like supply chains, you can see that this is absolutely just quite literally some green paint over the problem. And that's a problem that we all have to deal with, but it's like a super deceitful one, because it's not like Unilever is talking about BLM, but, you know, they sell shampoo and shit. Like, you know, the disconnect is large there, but when they're actually selling products that you consume and they're greenwashing them, it makes you believe that they're doing something, and it looks like they're actually doing something, but more often than not, they're completely not.
I would say that's a real scourge, basically. It's also why I'm a strong believer in the idea that good intentions don't necessitate positive outcomes. And I think this is a mistake that people make in relation to this particular topic. It's such a deeply ingrained mentality. I don't get how and why people think that way, and people don't get how I don't, but I just don't see it as automatic that just because I have good intentions, you know, I really want to do something for the environment, therefore, no matter what I do, it is a good thing. It's not true. And actually, in some situations, I think like the one that you were pointing out, Ruta, it can do the opposite. Because if the result of greenwashing is accelerated consumption of like goods and services that are actually really bad for the environment, you are engendering the opposite outcome than the one that you want. And I think it's another reason why, like, being kind of sober and clear-minded, despite the emotive nature of a lot of these issues, because naturally the only issues, that's another point actually, the only issues that the companies will align themselves after are emotive issues, because what they're seeking is emotional leverage to influence buyer behavior. They won't choose something that isn't, you know, hot, that doesn't get people all worked up, even though there are like valid, like I haven't seen a company align themselves behind antibiotic resistance. That is one of the biggest threats against our species, but no one's choosing that, because no, like, who are you gonna like get worked up about that? The bacteria?
Telling me the anti-vaxxers are gonna come for antibacterial products now.
Oh no, I have experience. but you know, who are they going to try and influence with that? The bacteria? You know, the doctors? There's just no one to manipulate with that really on a large scale. So that, again, that shows you like where people's incentives lie. But I just, I think like sometimes I feel like it's a battle against human nature. It's like there are like multiple layers of this. Like, and the other layer, which is what I'm trying to get at, is the way we as consumers relate to these companies. And because these issues are emotive, the way that people relate to companies about them is often, well, just do something. Just do something. I don't care what. Just do something so I know that you're on my side. And the feeling is that, well, as long as they show they're on my side and they're doing something, it will be a good thing. And that's not necessarily true. And that can feed this like vicious circle that's like not actually conducive to the long-term goal. And that I welcome your thoughts on. But that's the thing that really concerns me. I don't know that dynamic between the consumers and the biz. They almost we're almost feeding the worst in each other because we're not willing to like be at least somewhat detached from these issues that we care about.
Absolutely. I think it goes back to like a fundamental principle when it comes to, and this is a marketing principle really, which is like, don't market stuff that you don't do. Like, it's like one of the fundamental principles of what we do. It's like, don't say you do X when you don't do that. Be honest about how you do things and why you do it. And if you can do that, you will sell your products. But you have to do it with integrity and honesty.
That's not sexy, Emma.
It might not be sexy, but the people who are now buying from you, who are millennial and Gen Z, like, care about honesty and integrity and those kind of things, because we are a different generation. And I think we are potentially looking at leaving some of those, maybe like those Unilevers, those dinosaur businesses who've been around for a long time. Maybe they're going to get left behind.
Do we care though? That's one of my questions. Do we care more? I think I think you do, clearly, with your background. I think maybe your sphere of millennials does. But do we on a large scale?
It all depends on how poor you are, is going to be my take. There's poverty where you really don't care. Then if you get to come out of poverty, then you tend to overconsume because you grew up in poverty and, you know, you've got the means to overconsume. And then you get to real, like, good money, and then you really care about what other people tend to think of you because of that. So then you start to consume expensive things, which are, you know, usually not any better, you know, status symbols, handbags and cars and, you know, that kind of thing. And then you get to filthy rich to a point where like money means nothing to you. And then you're hitting the peak of the environmentalists because they've got nothing to lose. They can afford everything. They can buy anything. So what do they want? They want to fucking be able to live on the planet. That's my take.
I do totally agree with you that depending on your economic status, that is obviously the gateway into what you can, like, can you afford to be green conscious? The answer to that for most people is no, we cannot, but we try to do our bit, if you know what I mean. But I do think there is more, maybe it's not that they care, Timi, I think maybe there's just more awareness. So I think people are a bit more conscious. Maybe they're not massively conscientious all the time, because if you are really like living in poverty, the last thing you're going to give a shit about is whether you're using a plastic straw or a paper straw. I mean, like, who gives a shit, you know? But we are aware. People are aware, and I think at the point that you have the choice to make, I think more like it's more likely that if you can make the choice at a similar price point, you would go with the healthier, more ethical option if you have that choice.
Yeah, I think I would agree that definitely there's more awareness, and we're definitely talking about it a lot more. But no need to name and shame. That whole exchange has got me curious. Like, looking at your circle, how would you assess the people you know, let's say friends, for example, in this issue? Like, what percentage of them would you say fall into the categories of, in relation to the topic we're talking about, don't give a shit. Give a shit but won't do anything. Give a shit and will do something.
I think in my circles, I would say people give a shit about specific stuff that relates to them, and they don't give a shit about stuff that doesn't relate to them. And I think that's a perfectly normal human way of handling stuff. There are quite a lot of people that I know that don't give a shit about climate change, as in, you know, within their, like, I do my recycling. Sorry, that's, you know, do you know what I mean? That because they can't necessarily conceptualize like what that might mean for them, but there are other issues that are, you know, resonate with them because it's part of their life that do, and so they therefore probably do give a shit about those things and actively give a shit about those things and actively try not to engage or work with people who are not giving a shit about that stuff. There's a lot of swearing there, so sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think I triggered the swearing through my phraseology of the question.
No, it's all welcome here. I think most of my friends fall into care but won't take action that will be very effortful. If it's something easy to switch to make, or, I don't know, showing up to Pride where it's fun to be part of the, you know, festivities, I think then yes, but I don't have many friends that are like hardcore anything really when it comes to, you know, the causes. Not that I can think of, and that could be just because I'm a very blasé person, and I would find that quite intense, and maybe I wouldn't be friends with them necessarily. So I think it's my own filtering system. But yeah, that's kind of where I think I stand.
Yeah, I would say, I think you know some great people, Emma, because I would say most of the people in my circle, and no judgment here, on most issues, like you said, I think it's perfectly normal human behavior to just basically prioritize the stuff that affects you the most. But I would say even with that, sometimes most of the people I know, they care in that they have a point of view. They will do something that's not super effortful, but they're not gonna, like, you know, they're not gonna make any meaningful sacrifice to change that. Like, they're not gonna stop flying to their holiday because of the environment. You know, that's too much, which on the surface I would say is not that big a sacrifice to make, considering like most humans that have ever existed did not get that luxury, let alone flying in like very nice environments. But not that I'm judging, I'm not. I'm just saying that that's kind of the bar I'm using in my head, and I don't think that most people I know would do that. But this is part of the issue, right? You make a good point, Ruta, that maybe it's part of your own filtering system. And I think someone should study this properly, because I'm actually very curious now. Because depending on your circle, you know, it can affect how you see it.
Yeah, and it depends, like you say, Ruta. I think, you know, if people are particularly passionate about something and you yourself are not, I think it depends on how that person behaves, and sometimes that's a turn off if they're particularly passionate, and it's not an issue that you yourself relate to. It can be quite difficult, but at the same time, I think I always go on if you really care about something, and it's not very often that I really care about something because I'm genuinely quite a shit human being, that when I do really care about something, I'll go all the way. So that's my stance. I'm like, if I'm gonna care about something, I'm gonna care about it to the bitter end. So, but that's maybe it's more of a personality thing than anything else, because I'll still eat McDonald's and watch EastEnders. So, you know.
Yeah.
Balance, mate, balance.
Exactly. You're hardcore in all directions. I like it. I have some questions in my head for you. So one is, do we agree that companies should do good in some way? They, beyond just making money, should try and help society become better in accordance to certain values like equality, fairness, etc., whatever they are?
I think if it's feasible, then yeah. I wouldn't give up the livelihood of your company for it, because of course you're employing people, and that's a good thing in itself, and that's a positive thing.
Same view, Emma?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think if it's feasible and you're going to commit to it, then yes, do it.
My content marketing brain is switching off. That's why I'm asking this question. I'm like, what are the takeaways for the people who like want to do something? And my next question was going to be like, given we agree on that, what is one thing that you, or what is one approach that you think any company can take that does contribute to the net good outside of just making money, and that does not involve virtue signaling?
The most simple one, like treating your people actually well. I think both Emma and I say that, you know, after leaving Clear Review, like, we're fucking spoiled, but we will never go back, because that is the standard and the bar now. Probably why we don't work for other people anymore. But just treating your people well, and like they're real humans, that's the one for me.
Treat them well, but ask them what they want.
I was about to say, if it's reasonable.
Yeah, if it's not something completely left field, yeah.
I want a sex dungeon in the office, please.
Yeah.
That's inclusive. It's inclusive,
It's very
to
inclusive.
people with kinks. Yeah, 100% agree. I think it's so obvious, and maybe that's almost why it's easy to overlook. Everyone wants to go for the sexy thing. I think it's probably a strength as marketers that each of us has, if I can blow our horn a little bit, is that I think we're each the sorts of people who don't like to skip steps just because they're not sexy. Like, just do the thing. I always like to say marketing is not like innovation. It's not like you have to come up with some new material or locomotive. It's more like making a wheel. Like, we know how to make wheels. Wheels have worked for a long time. Just make a really good wheel. Just like, okay, you can decorate it however you want. You can, you know, you can give it 4 spokes instead of 5, but just like have a circumference, have a fulcrum, give it spokes, and just make it work. But I think what happens a lot of the time is marketers, because we're typically novelty-seeking creatures, are like, but that's like what everybody else is doing. I want to do something else, something fun. And then we start going off creating all these random things that have nothing to do with marketing. And I think this whole issue of virtue signaling is just like a consequence of that impulse.
Thank you everyone for listening to this episode of Blame It on Marketing. It's a very deep and huge topic, so I think we could go on for hours, but we're gonna call it here for everyone's benefit. But if you do want us to talk about anything more specific that we covered in this podcast, let us know. Thank you so much, Timi, for joining us. It's always so insightful to ask you questions, basically. And yeah, thank you for watching, and look out for the next episode.